we are here at the Salinas Public Library. It's October 14th, 2013. And we have two members of the Closter family, which was, what would you say, almost a pioneer family in the Salinas area. And they are going to introduce themselves and explain who the Closters were and how they first came to Salinas. So we'll start with you, Marie.
Okay. Well, what I remember my dad, Paul Closter, telling me about Grandpa T.C. Closter coming to America was that in 1890, Grandpa, Theodore Christian Closter, was 16, and he just had an adventurous spirit. And he wanted to come to America. He wasn't quite sure how to do it. But he got some encouragement from his parents, I believe, and because his mom sewed him a nice wool jacket, and in the seams of the jacket she sewed in some money, rather hidden, because it had been told by others who had immigrated to the United States that there were robbers and thieves, and if you had anything in a satchel, it could be grabbed and taken from you. And so the money was hidden in Grandpa Theodore's clothes, and I don't know how it all came about, but he I heard, worked his way across on a big ship, and probably rode in steerage, and he worked his way across. And he was supposed to come to a place in the western United States, a place called Salinas, where his uncle had come in the 1850s during the gold rush, and his uncle was supposed to meet him. And so of course Grandpa would have gotten to New York on the ship, and then we believe he got on the train and came cross country. You know, this is 1890, so I'm not sure of our dates here and the history of trains and all too, but anyway, he got to Salinas and he was to meet this uncle. Now I'm sorry, I don't know the uncle's name, but he would have been an Uncle Closter. And maybe in further research we can find that out. His uncle was to meet him at the train station, and Grandpa got here. He's a little excited and agitated and all, and he got here and he looked around and there was no one. And of course he didn't know any English, and there was no one. So he waited and waited about an hour, and his uncle didn't show up. And pretty soon it got dark. And I'm not sure what happened, but I imagine Grandpa slept in the doorway of the train station. They probably locked it at night. And I'm not sure how he got food. Next day, again looking for the uncle, and the next day after that, and a week later he was still walking and pacing. He must have gotten some food by now from some kind people. And but anyway, his uncle never showed up. But Grandpa was here for his new life and for his adventure. Now, according to my dad, it wasn't too long and Grandpa got a job. And he was 16, and there were a lot of horses here in the area. And he walked quite a ways, and he found a farm where they needed a stable hand. And he went to work there as a stable hand. He slept in the barn, slept with the horses and in the straw, and probably some smells of manure too, but it was just his job to keep those barns clean. And so that's how he got his start here. And 1890, Salinas, California.
You don't by any chance know where the farm was or anything like that?
My recall is it was Chular or Soledad Gonzalez down in that area.
Yeah.
That was my recall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then he was here as a stable hand, I believe. Didn't he go back to Denmark at some point?
He did. I'm not sure, until we get more of our project work done here on the family, how long he stayed before he went back, but he did eventually go back. And I'm Sally. I'm Paul's daughter. Paul is the oldest of TC and Emma's children. Marie's second born, and our brother Paul is third born, and he's not able to be here today. But he did go back. I'm not sure how many years he was here before he went back. I'm sure that he tried to earn and save money so that he could go back and bring Grandma Emma Nissen Closter over to the U.S. to marry her. So
I understand that they had known each other before. Is that correct?
we believe so.
They were
we
like
believe so.
sweethearts. and-
Right.
When we visited Abenra, Denmark in 1995, our father, Paul, went with us, Sally and me, and my husband, of course, went along too as our travel guide. But we got to visit the grade school where T.C. Closter and we believe Emmy Marie Nissen went to grade school together. I don't know, we're not for sure if they actually went to the same grade school, because Grandma was from Schleswig-Holstein, Germany, and which is actually right there, because Abenra is a border town, and so is the other one. And I know Grandma spoke both languages, Danish and German. I think Grandpa did too. But there was some connection. Now, Sally, tell them what we actually saw at the grade school. Do you remember?
I know I don't.
Well, there wasn't anything there except some bushes.
Well, that's true. We have photographs, though, of Grandpa's school, Scobie. And it's interesting to note that that whole area, as Marie pronounces it so well, I do okay with Oppenra, but not the other.
Schleswig-Holstein,
But
yeah.
that whole area in the years of history, world history, has it sometimes been Germany and sometimes been Denmark, depending on what's going on in the political climate. So that's interesting that they happen to have come from that area. But he did bring Grandma to America on a ship. We have the records of their ship passage. I happen to own the beautiful trunk. The humpback, camelback trunk was made in Oppenra. And that's what Grandma brought, her only belongings that she could bring to her new home, to her new married life, leaving all family behind. When I think about it, I think, she was such a quiet lady full of grace, and I just think she must have really loved this man, this adventurous young man, to have left everyone and everything and come with him. And then when they arrived here, late November, then they were married in December here in Salinas. So we have records of that.
Do you remember, know what year? It's okay,
check.
but what I remember that Grandpa worked as a stable hand for something like 3 or 4 years to save money to go back and get this sweet girl. And so the calendar will bear out, that it was
And things took much,
the early
much
90s probably when they
longer
married.
than what we would think, because even traveling by ship took much longer to cross the water, and then there was, preparing in the new land to bring a bride here, saving the money and knowing where you're going to live when you bring her here, all of that. So there were a lot of years between the time he came at 16 and the time they married and the time, all of that, which we have record of, but I can't give it off the top of my head.
There must have been a Danish community here, and I would think she would have stayed with some of them.
Well, there were a number of people from Denmark in the area. I don't know how many of them were actual neighbors, but there was actually a Danish Lutheran church. My recall is, and I could be incorrect, I need to check this out, that the Danish Lutheran church was on the north side of where Closter Park is, across the street, which is still a Lutheran church. But I recall attending church there with Grandpa and Grandma as a tiny child.
Oh my gosh.
And then later, St. Ansgar's moved into Reading. But
Salinas, into Salinas.
Salinas, I'm sorry. But this, I have to check this out. So, but that's kind of my recall.
So we've got, see, I guess it was TC and was it Emily? Emma.
Well, I think it was Emmy.
Emmy.
I mean, on
Right.
her,
Everything I've seen
on
is
her
Emmy.
urn with her ashes, it says Emmy Marie. I thought it was Emma too for a long time.
No, it is Emmy with a Y.
And she also has some kind of a secondary middle name, Wilhelmina.
Nissen and Wilhelmina. So it was like Emmy Marie Nissen Wilhelmina.
So,
And we know less about her side of the family as far as having any genealogy. We know less about her side than we do about Grandpa's.
so they got here, they got married. How did they make a living? What did they do after that? He didn't stay as a stable hand, did he?
No, he started farming. And we don't know at what point he purchased land in Blanco off of,
Hunter Lane.
right, on Hunter Lane. But that's where he started, was in the Blanco on farming there. We have pictures of the place, and our cousin Jan has done some research talking to the people that live there now, which is just fascinating. So she really has a better handle on that part of the history, but that's where they farmed. Actually, I believe until they had 4 children, my dad would have been,
Firstborn.
he would have been in his early teens, early to mid-teens, and the youngest, Christine, would have been 2 or 3 when they took the 4 children and went back for a visit. That was the only time that the whole family went. I believe Grandpa went other times, but that's the only time the whole family went.
They went as a family. It was 1923.
And we
And-
think that that may be at that point that he sold the land in Blanco, and that's when they came back, that they purchased the land on Williams Road, and perhaps for a period of time lived on Riker Street while either the house was being built or remodeled. That is not, we're not sure. We're not sure.
Do you know what he was growing? What he grew in the Blanco and then moved to the Alisal area, and what was he farming?
You know, I can speak better to what he grew on Williams Road. I really don't know for sure what he grew in Blanco. We know that he grew barley and some beans on Williams Road. He had cattle. I have no idea how many head, but he certainly was actively farming, and farming with horses, horse-drawn equipment until later years, and then he had a tractor and he had a harvester. We have pictures of that with the wonderful American flag flying on top of the harvester. This great immigrant that came here and became naturalized and loved this country.
Now, I had always heard there was dairying out in the Alisal area. Did he actually do dairying?
I don't think he did dairying for selling milk. My recall as a child was it was for their personal use, because they made churned butter in the basement, which was awesome. I can still smell the fragrance of that and taste it at their table. But to my knowledge, I don't recall Dad talking about them having a dairying operation. There were other dairying operations in the Alisal. One was behind, Grandpa and Grandma were at 415 Williams Road, and then if you travel east on Williams Road past Alisal Elementary, our farm was at 801 Williams Road, which is still there. It's right on the border of the development, the last farmland not to be developed.
It's all surrounded all the way around
Yeah.
by development and houses.
So anyway, there was a dairy behind us at 801 Williams Road, which would have been kind of near Permanente, but not really. Would be a ways west of Permanente, and that was Chumberlain, and I have no idea how to spell the name, Joe Chumberlain. So that was one dairy. And then I think on Riker Street, I have a sense some of the Riker Street property backed up like into the slough. My dad always talked about the Elkhorn Slough, which came clear up behind our place at 801. And I think there were some dairies on that, along there. I can remember names like As a Party, and I had some of them written down here. Lorenzen, the Party. Yeah, and some of them, McMichael, some of these were undoubtedly were dairy people. But you know, the dairying as an industry in LaSalle, I don't remember that.
Is it time to show?
Oh, we can show this, yes. This is the only memento I brought, and this is TC's branding iron, and it's simply 2C. And I don't recall Dad talking about it or Grandpa ever talking about it. I ended up with it, and so I've kept it. So anyway, I don't know that they branded, you know, the draft horses that were used in the fields or to carry the family to town. You know, they may have just used it for the few head of cattle that they raised for food for the table. I wouldn't think there would be any need to brand dairy cattle, so, and the one that they had for the home use.
So they essentially spent the rest of their time on this farm out in the LaSalle area on Williams Road.
Right.
So then their children, your father was Paul,
Right.
was your father. Did he go to high school in this area?
Do you know what? Of the 4 Closter children, my dad, firstborn Paul, and then Julius, and then Ted, and then Christine, they all finished high school except our dad. And for years I thought that it was because being the oldest, you know, that he was needed on the farm, so, you know, he dropped out of school. But Marie had a different story, and I'll let her tell that.
Well, our dad also had an adventurous spirit, and he just had, he wanted to get off on his own somewhat, but how do you get off on your own when you've got a dad who is kind of hovering over you and trying to parent you? And but one time my dad in his later years was sharing with me about, there were certain parts of school that he didn't like. And he especially didn't like English, and those lady teachers that wanted to teach him how to have a good handwriting and teach him how to punctuate things correctly and how to spell words right. And he thought he was okay just the way he was. And it was interesting, he was telling me this because it turned out that his middle daughter, Marie, ended up being an English teacher. And I just love nouns and verbs and teaching kids to write right. And I ended up teaching mostly 7th and 8th grade. And as we understand it, Dad, Paul Marius Closter, dropped out of school in about the 8th grade to farm with his dad. And I think I'm sure he was needed. And I'm sure the Closters didn't have a lot to do with. But I don't know if we can show any pictures, but I do excuse me, I have it, I don't know if, yeah, here it is. A picture that was very close to my father's heart was a picture of what life would have been like for our dad and for our grandparents on the Williams Road farm. And this is an artist impression, and it's quite popular, I'm sure. And we had it was hanging in our house for a long time. But one of the things I wanted to address was how much our father loved horses, and he talked about the workhorses and how hard they pulled and how hard they worked and how much they sweat. but we're the younger generation.
Do you remember
And-
what kind of horses he had?
Yeah, as far as what breed specifically, I do not.
Okay.
I just know they were draft horses, and I know that Dad, being the oldest of the four, was probably the one that had to do the harnessing and the hitching up when they went to town of the buggy. Probably he was the one that when they came home and the horses were sweaty after working, he was the one that probably had to groom them down. So, though he loved animals, when he had his own place, he wasn't going to have animals to take care of. So he was a dirt farmer.
He was a dirt farmer, and besides that, we're not sure of the exact time, but our brother has the picture of our dad on the new kind of horsepower,
Yes.
and that was a Caterpillar tractor. And that could pull so much harder than the horses and do so much work faster. And but Dad, I can remember Dad talking to me, and he would name the horses. Now, as far as a breed, not so much, but he'd get kind of this little glimmer in his eye, and he said, well, I remember one thing Dad said about the horses. Once the tractors came in and the combines and all the new John Deeres and everything, and he said, well, I think we'd be well advised if we would remember that someday, if we don't have gasoline and diesel, we would have difficulty breeding horses fast enough to get our work done. Remember Daddy saying that? He said, we could be in a lot of trouble someday and get this far off look. And he says all these cars are really great, and of course he loved his farm pickups, and gradually over time Dad got more tractors. I mean, for the approximately 100 acres that he farmed. But Grandpa got a tractor too, didn't he?
Oh, yes, and a harvester.
Oh yeah, he got real modern.
Oh, absolutely. He wasn't afraid to be up with the times. In fact, his pride and joy, both he and Grandma, were their charcoal gray Packard sedan. Oh, they loved that car. That was late, much later. Yeah, that was
much later. Yeah, they were very well retired then, and enjoying some of the small fruits of their labors.
Now, you said you used the term dirt farmer. What did your father actually?
Well, dirt farming, where Dad and Mom started out in early 30s, they were married in 34, on the heels of that depression. It was also sometimes called sky farming. Not the same thing actually, but just meaning rather than livestock and cattle, they were growing crops. And in Dad's case, the sky farming aspect meant he didn't have any irrigation on his land. And he leased land from a Mr. Schwain who lived in Blanco. Very wonderful, mature man, big, tall man, gracious gentleman. He would come, up to see how Dad was doing, and Dad, farmed it, and Mom took care of the house. They both, as if it were their own. And that's where we kids were raised in the early years on 801 Williams Road. And he would come up just to see how things were going. And if Dad had ideas that would improve the land and the farming, he would go along with it. And our dad, he would fill in sloughs, and he made reservoirs, and before, they farmed there for 30 years, leasing, saving money, scrimping savings, so they could eventually buy their own land and their own home. And during those years, he just improved and improved that property and had it all under irrigation by the time they finished farming there. So,
This is where you grew up?
yes, at
801 Williams Road, yeah.
Which was east of Grandpa and Grandma's land. So that was fun to see it develop. And Dad basically raised small white beans, dry beans, okay? He did from time to time raised sugar beets, a little bit of lettuce, and he did raise barley, which they harvested. But his philosophy was, as a small farmer with a wife and 3 children to provide for, there was a lot less risk in raising a crop that could be stored until the price was right. So, you know, the lettuce was fine for people who had the means to take the risk, but he chose to stay with the small white beans. And he loved to eat beans. They both did. I mean, Dad was great at cooking a pot of beans, but his favorite to cook was pink beans. He liked pink beans the best. So.
Well, so now we're coming into your memories. What was it like to grow up on this farm out in the Allison area?
Well, it was wonderful. I had a wonderful childhood. We had a wonderful childhood. And we were very much part of the farm. We were very much part of the land, and the land was a part of us. In fact, today, driving into town, coming from several visits along the way, but I live in Portland, Oregon now. Anyway, coming into the Salinas Valley, I get kind of misty-eyed. And because this is the land, it just, when you're a farm kid, the land is really part of you. You play in the land, you play in the dirt. That was when we were little. We had lots of baby kittens, and I think there were times when we pretended to dress the kittens in the doll clothes and roll the kittens around in the doll buggy. And we'd go on picnics down behind in the slough, and we had a mile lane in front of our house. So after school, we'd get off the bus, and I can remember walking down that lane, and there was just no problem. I mean, we walked everywhere out on the farm, and to this day, I love to walk. I mean, sun starts to set a little bit, and it's time for Marie to go for her walk, just like on Williams Road. But it was probably along about the time I was 8, I became more a part of the farm, in that by then Dad and Mom had decided that we kids could become workers. And one of the first work projects I remember was going down to the slough, because Dad had a hay crop down there. What was maybe more straw and weeds, I don't know, but some hay down there. And so he took us down there in the old pickup, the 37 Chevy pickup, and somehow by then he had 3 pitchforks. Well, that's enough for 3 kids. And so he taught us how to shock hay, and how to get the hay up there just right, and so it was a perfect shape. Do you remember that, Sally? Just had to be a perfect round, and then we'd go off to 3 different places, and we'd work on our own shock of hay to see who could get the most perfectly shaped one. And so we, little by little, we eased into this becoming part of the work. What are some of your earliest remembers? 'Cause you're older, of the work.
Oh, I remember the hay shocks for sure. And, you know, taking lunch down to where Dad might be working on the tractor. We did that with Grandpa too. Picnics were big. I mean, we both sort of chuckled. This is a little side note here. We both chuckled at your listing amusements, because, you know, there was no such thing as going to a movie. We didn't have TV. In fact, at our place on Williams Road, we didn't have electricity, nor did we have a telephone. So I walked to first grade. Marie, by then, she took the bus, but I walked the whole way, which was probably it was a good at least 2.5, if not 3 miles.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Alsell Elementary, and then the next year the bus came. But anyway, back to chores and learning to work in the fields.